But Rob, that's our short topics. We're now on to our main topic. After a bunch of hot takes on the new series, after our last monthly show where we went in depth on that whole new series of Doctor Who, we've done a lot of New Who this year, and particularly these last couple of months. And so we said, right, July, we're doing a classic season. We put out 4 nominations and asked our listeners to pick one. And on X, we had results from 145 of you. Season 18, I thought would do a bit better. Only got 11%.
Yeah.
Season 19, Davo, 17.9%. Leading for a while and got very, very close was Season 3 at 34.5%. I put that out there thinking there's no way people will vote for Season 3. It's long and it's missing and some people hate it. And I love it, but it came very close to winning, so I'll be nominating that one again. Don't you worry about that. But the winner was Season 12, 36.6% of the vote. Are you keen for this one, Rob?
I am, Dave. If this was a wrestling battle royale, Season 18 and 19 got tossed out of the ring pretty early on, and then it was just 3 and 12 slugging it out. And I thought 3 was going to win, honestly.
I did too until the very last moment, but a few votes came in for Season 12, and that's good. Look, we've had this sort of circling around our nominations for a while. I was very much looking forward to watching this and have enjoyed it. But Rob, let's start at the very beginning, as we always do with these deep dives. When did you first see it, and what are your memories?
Yeah, this is one of those times where I can't be definitive at all, because I would have been so young and seeing these stories on repeats and potentially never saw it in order at all the first time around. So it's not like Season 23 where I can say, oh yes, I bought Doctor Who magazine 119 and felt very fanish and went home and it was early 87 and I watched Season 23 and I can remember it clearly. Or, oh yes, I watched Season 24 at fan club parties, you know, on VHS tapes sent over from the UK. Or, oh yes, I was on the afternoon show before Remembrance of the Daleks went out. I can remember lots of stuff very clearly. But for Season 12, which dropped first time in the UK the year I was born, you know, I just don't have any clear memories around this. Were there repeats in the late 70s? Maybe I saw those as a really young kid with my brother putting me in front of the TV and trying to scare me. I have no memory of that. Repeats in the early to mid 80s? Maybe. I know I saw Revenge of the Cybermen on BBC Video at some stage because my brother bought it and I quite enjoyed that. But broadly, Dave, this season is a total mess in my head as to when I first saw it.
Yeah, I'm a little bit similar to you. I did look up when this was broadcast in my early childhood, and it did go out as a repeat in 1983, so there's every possibility I was sitting on Dad's lap as he watched it when I was 3 years old.
Yeah, I was 8, so I may have seen that for sure.
Yeah, but I do remember it was part of the 1986 repeat run. It did come out towards the end of that year, and so I absolutely would have been watching that as it went out, and we did have a few of the episodes on VHS from that season. So Robot, for example, my dad recorded all 4 episodes and kept them, and so we had that. The Ark in Space, we had episodes 1 and 4, so clearly he wasn't working on the nights that episodes 2 and 3 were broadcast. And yes, like you, we definitely borrowed Revenge of the Cybermen from the local video library, and Dad may have borrowed a second video recorder from work and done an illegal dub.
Nice.
So going back and watching it, there are stories that I am incredibly familiar with and remember sort of word for word from my childhood. And then there are the ones that I definitely have seen many, many times, but we didn't have on home video, so I didn't see until a little bit later. And Sontaran Experiment is probably the one that I have the least memories of. I don't remember seeing that until quite a bit later.
Yeah, similar for me. Although this is a season where, as I say, I can't pinpoint the first time I saw it. I have, like just about every loyal classic fan out there, seen it so many times, and some of the stories in particular so many times. So it's not a mystery to me at all. The stories, the adventures are very familiar. They're not all comfy slippers by any means, which is how I describe something like the Five Doctors. But I've seen them enough to know there's no surprises, and I know the stories inside out. So this rewatch wasn't to learn anything new or challenge myself in any way, just as a bit of a refresh. And truth be told, I didn't even need to do that. But I really enjoyed having an excuse to get the Blu-ray out and look at the shows again. So thank you to everyone who voted for it. I quite enjoyed this.
Yeah, and inversely, because it has been something I've seen so many times and am so familiar with, I reckon this is the first time I've watched most of these stories since the Blu-ray came out in 2018. So it's probably been 5 or 6 years that since I last watched them, with the exception of Revenge of the Cybermen, which we did do about 2-3 years ago on the podcast.
I'm probably the same.
Yeah, so, and this is the thing that we talk about, isn't it, Rob? We look at our DVD shelf or our Blu-ray shelf, we go, what am I going to pick to watch? You go, season 12. I know that's good. I've seen that one. I know it off by heart. I don't need to pull it off the shelf. I'll go watch something that, is a challenge or I haven't seen for a while, and it gets neglected. And then you put it on and, well, that's what we're going to talk about. But any other thoughts going into the rewatch before we dive in?
I'm good.
Well, let's dive in then, Rob. And I'll throw to you. I've been talking a lot lately. Robot.
Yeah, Robot. I don't mind Robot as a debut story. It's not one I regularly want to reach for. To be honest, very few Doctor debut stories are, aside from maybe Spearhead from Space, especially from the classic era, but it does the job. It smooths over from the Pertwee era to the Baker era, both on and off screen. I think it's probably the least chaotic changeover in all of the classic era, and it doesn't crap the bed on screen, well, maybe outside of the Action Man tank sequence. It's solid. That's my opening gambit.
I knew that I was going to enjoy this one, but enjoyed it even more than I expected to. As you say, it is a lovely easing from the Pertwee era into the Tom Baker era, and it is probably the most planned debut story of the run, because you've got Letts and Dix doing a proper changeover. They're planning it all. You've got Courtney and Levine and Liz Sladen and all the rest of it sort of making it all work. So it is very good in that sense. But watching Tom Baker just become the Fourth Doctor before our eyes so quickly, and the way that, unlike too many debut stories in both classic and New Who, frankly, he just dives in. Probably Patrick Troughton's the only other one that really just gets to just dive in as the Doctor by the end of part one and just go for it. Is really, really good. I've got some little points to talk about, but that's my opening gambit.
Yeah, I'll pick up on the Doctor thread then. The Doctor comes across as very alien straight away, and not just because of post-regenerative stuff going on. To some degree, it's just Tom being Tom, but the script is also writing him quite differently to the Pertwee Doctor as well. I mean, so much for Terence saying, I just wrote the Doctor. No, I think they're actually writing him different here, because he doesn't seem to give a hoot about UNIT, for example. Pertwee loved his UNIT family. Although he has some affection for Sarah, it doesn't seem to be much, and he's quite happy to leave the Earth without her early in the story. By sort of using show don't tell, we see that this is absolutely a different Doctor to Pertwee. Yeah,
I think that the exchange I really enjoyed watching was the first time the Doctor meets Kettlewell. And you can imagine Pertwee sort of being quite blustery, quite pompous, but then using their view of ecology and all the rest of it to sort of bond, whereas Tom sort of just does this. Yes, well, it's very important. Yes, you've done very well, Professor the Robot, and it's just a whole different vibe. And you're right, it is written differently, it's delivered differently, and that's really, really effective. Speaking of Kettlewell, look, I get that this was written to be very, very disposable, but the Kettlewell plot doesn't work. As a kid, it totally, for me, did work. It was like, oh, he's actually a secret baddie. Oh, there you go. And oh, he's not quite as bad as the others. That works. It works as a kid. As an adult, the whole old Kettlewell was pretending not to be involved, and it's like, well, no, there's just a little bit too. There are too many scenes where clearly the actor and or the director is treating it like Kettlewell is innocent. Yeah. And if you were doing that today, there would be a lot more little signs to the audience of, no, something's not quite right here. And then suddenly he's just helping the main villains, and then he's, doesn't quite understand their entire plan. It doesn't quite work. It is a weakness of a story, but it is a story that does have lots of cool characters like Miss Winters, like Jellicoe, like Harry Sullivan. There's always something happening. Terence Dix knows how to fill a script.
Yeah, I'll pick up on the Harry comment there. Harry is interesting in the way he's very old school, in almost every way you can think of. Yet he doesn't bat an eyelid at most of what goes on in this story. Indeed, throughout the whole season, like really weird stuff happens. Harry doesn't bat an eyelid, even though he's this old school bloke. And maybe you can put that down to him being with UNIT and he's been exposed to some weird stuff before this. But at the same time, he doesn't seem to have been briefed on who the Doctor is, and when he detects the 2 heartbeats, he's actually genuinely surprised by that. Not with other things in the story, like a robot growing to monster size, but the Doctor having 2 hearts throws him.
Yes, no, I kind of like that, though. There's just this sort of wonderful idea of this old school British naval officer just seeing an alien going, "Oh, I say," and just getting on with it. It's kind of interesting, but I see what you're saying, but Ian Marter's performance just carries you through that, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. He's great.
The last thing I want to just talk about is the K1 robot. I think that this is one of the iconic designs of the series. The way that they don't try and do a human face. It's got that cool sort of, stained glass red eye thing and the way the mouth is framed and the body. That's an iconic image as long as it stands still. It doesn't walk very well. I think that Davo was right when he was talking about, in his era, we can't make a robot that walks now, let alone in 1980 something. And I think he was right then. But look, it was a fun story. I've scored this, Rob. I don't know if you have, but I've scored Robot a B.
I've given it 7.5.
7.5. That's good.
Yeah, it is good.
That's good.
Yeah, that is not a bad mark at all.
We then move into the Ark in Space. Every time I have watched this, when the Blu-ray came out, when the DVD came out, when I've put it on to watch it for here, I've sat down and gone, look, I'll watch at least episode 1, see how I go. And every single time I've suddenly looked at my watch and gone, part 4 just ended. Where did that time go? Because it is such an engrossing story. It was a story that as a kid I remembered being fascinated about. There were lots of ideas in there that really caught my interest and my attention, but it was one of the few stories where as a kid I didn't run away, but I did sort of have moments of, ooh, don't like that, it's a bit creepy, ooh, no. I do remember it having that effect on me as a kid, but watching it back, it's such a well-made story. The script isn't necessarily brilliant, but it works, but it just feels incredible.
And coming after Robot, this one's always felt to me like, okay, we've done what we had to do with that first one. we've got rid of that crew now. They're gone. This is the future, both of the show and quite literally that they are in the future. And even though everything's all bright and shiny, that Hinchcliffe Gothic vibe is already in there. There's fear all through this one, which is nice because Doctor Who should be scary, at least for the kids, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. No, you're absolutely right. It is scary, and even though it does as I often say, the gleaming metal and flashing lights of the future that I love, it turns the lights down when you need to, and when you go down into the engine area with the solar stacks, that is dark and that is creepy, and it's a really good and effective use of lighting to sell the story. So I really like that. The Wirren design, Rob?
Could be. Well, I was going to say could be better, but then that would take away from the actual design of it. The design is great when it's still, but when it tries to move, it falls apart.
Yeah, I don't think they've quite worked out how they walk, because they've sort of got the 6 things that are meant to be legs sort of just dangling limply at the side. It's not sort of clear if they're walking on something else. So not ideal, but the larva I actually thought was quite good, and the transitional stages, I mean, for 1975 or whatever it was, some of those transitional stages, like the stuff where the skin splits apart to see you see another layer and everything, that's really, really good. I should just mention, friend of the podcast, Richard, notes the cliffhanger of part 1 where the Wirren falls out of the cupboard. That's his very first memory of Doctor Who.
Is that right?
So that definitely stands out there. Was it too nasty, Rob?
Well, it could have been nastier, Dave, because there's apparently a whole scene that wasn't shot where Noah's head apparently split open and lava or flies or something came out of it. But there was also the scene which was filmed and then cut, which is where Noah begs to be killed. And it's a super clumsy edit. It's Australian censored version of Caves of Androzani levels of clumsiness, this edit, where the Doctor and Vera are talking to Noah, and then next thing the door is shut in between them, and you're like, did I blink and miss something? What just happened there? And it was the whole moment of Noah begging for them to kill him was just cut out at the last minute. So it's a super clumsy edit. So yes, it did go too far and got edited, and it was going to go even further, and some scenes weren't shot.
Yeah, I think that just demonstrates how up to the knuckle they were willing to take this story. And so what's left, goes right up to what they can get away with. And look, I think it works very well. As I say, as a kid, it scared me but didn't terrify me, which I think is the right place to be. But also, you've got this TARDIS crew now just really establishing themselves. As you said, we've had the friendly, simple story and robot, enjoyable but simple, to introduce us to our new regular cast, including the new Doctor, and now you throw them into a Hinchcliffe Holmes story, and I think that works very well. It must have been a bit of a whiplash for the viewers, but a positive one, because part 2, clearly word of mouth has got around it. It's what, like the highest rated episode that isn't up against a strike or something?
Right, yeah.
Like 13 million or something watched this.
Yeah, wow.
It's absolutely impressive. Look, I could go on again and again and again about how good this is. I'm still not quite sure how the Wirrn life cycle works. I've decided that there must be 2. There are people who are infected and taking over, and then there are ones that just come out of eggs, because where did all the other Wirrn come from? Yeah. The ending's really powerful. I don't think you'd do that ending today, which is perhaps a bit of a shame. This is possibly my favourite of the season. I gave it an A+.
Yeah. Before I give my score, I'll just say I was struck watching this just how different this is to Ncuti's first season, which we've just watched. Here, Tom's like, these Wirrn are bad news. Let's electrocute the bastards and save the world. While Ncuti's like, oh no, this snot monster's misunderstood. Oh, it's really just like me. Let's play nice. It's like, oh, could you be any more different to the way Doctor Who is these days? Yeah, I like this a lot. It's an 8 out of 10 for me.
An 8 out of 10? I think that's harsher.
Yeah, you think it should be higher?
I think it should be... Well, I gave it an A+, so...
Yeah.
Clearly I do. But no, fair enough. We'll see if something betters it later on in the season. Take us into the Sontaran experiment.
Yes, the Sontaran experiment. It's a story I've always liked, primarily because of its length. We get in, we run around the countryside, and then we get out. I don't think the storyline could really sustain more episodes because there's not a lot going on. You've got the lone Sontaran doing his experiments. He needs to be stopped. Why he's doing the experiments when the Earth is deserted and the Sontarans could just arrive en masse, I really have no idea. It doesn't make sense to me in that sense. But as far as 2 episodes go, as a bit of a runaround, falling down some holes, a few fights, some tension... It's fine. It's an easy watch. I like it.
Yeah, I like it too. It is definitely an easy watch. And I want to pick up on something you said there about how light it is, because watching this again, I realised there's only about 15 minutes of actual plot in this story. Yeah. Episode 1, the entire episode 1 is just set up. It's really good setup. I think that the filming's really good, and we'll come back to that. But the location's really good, and it's very tense and interesting, but you don't actually meet Styre until the end of episode 1 of a 2-parter. Yeah. And then the last sort of 5 to 10 minutes of the second episode is just the denouement and the fight. And then everybody's saying, oh, goodbye, it's been a jolly jape. So there's only actually about 15 minutes of the Sontaran experimenting on people and doing that plot in there. And the fact that I've never really noticed that before just says how much the story carries you through the atmosphere and through the mystery and the direction. And I was watching this time, and the directors clearly just looked at those locations and those rocks and gone, right, time to go and have some fun. Because he's looking down, he's looking up, he's walking through stuff. He makes incredible use of the location. It's some of the best direction we've seen, and I don't think it gets noticed because it is this tiny little 2-parter in this season.
Yeah, it does get lost a lot in this season because there's just, well, as we're going to be discussing in a minute, there's some much bigger stories in this season. There
are, but look, it looks amazing. Styre's great. I think it's also really interesting that we sometimes talk about TARDIS crews larger than 2 not always working. Here we have a small, simple 2-part story, but each of the 3 regulars gets a strand. They get something to do, and they play a part. And I think that's just a really good piece of writing. There's a lot to recommend this. A really great lot to recommend this.
Yeah. Interestingly, Dave, this will be news to you. I've never told you this story before. when we made a fan film in our local club back in the late 80s, I essentially ripped this off because I wrote this fan film and I had the Doctor, played by myself, land on a planet with his companions and they find the victim of some experiments. And it goes on from there with a lot of running back and forth through fields. One of our listeners who you know, Mark Douglas,
who
I mentioned from time to time, he was an evil Time Lord in it, Dave. He was conducting the experiments. But weirdly, I don't have any memory of sort of knowing I was ripping it off at the time. I don't recall being a sort of a student of the Sontaran experiment and even knowing it well enough in the late 80s to rip it off. Although looking back, I see all the same beats now, so I must have been ripping it off. Isn't that weird? I must have channeled it somehow for this fan film.
That's really weird. It's funny how that stuff happens, isn't it?
Yeah, very strange. I do want to do a modern edit digitally of that fan film. I don't know if I'm brave enough to put it on YouTube, but if I ever do, I'll share it with you and you can have a laugh at myself and Mark and some other fans.
I would love to see that. That sounds fantastic.
Yeah. I would give this a 7 out of 10 myself.
7 out of 10, so it's the weakest of the three so far from you.
For me, yes.
I'm giving it a B+, so I'm putting it in the middle of the three so far.
Interesting. Okay.
Rob, that brings us to a Genesis of the Daleks.
Yeah.
Now, this is one that I remember as much from having some of it as off-screen recordings as from having a cassette of the abridged version. Mm-hmm. So I have some good memories of this, but it's not one that I've pulled out all that often. I haven't watched it for 6 years, in fact. And when I put this on, I was very, very impressed. I was very, very impressed. It looks and feels like a big story. Even just little things. So, for example, when the Doctor and Harry are taken on the little electric go-kart in part 1, it feels like they're actually going through a long corridor, and it feels like there are lots of different sets. Now, I know that it's just the same set of desks and flats reorientated in different ways, but it feels big. And for 6 episodes, it doesn't let up.
No.
I was very, very astounded when we got to the prisoners trying to escape up the rocket, and I thought, wow, we're only up to the end of part 2.
Yeah.
And we've already done all of this, and there's more to come. It packs it in.
Yeah, it does. I think this is a 6-parter that holds together. And I don't say that lightly, as I will regularly and happily call out 6-parters from the classic era for their padding. You're often left defending them, Dave.
Both of those are true, yes.
Yeah, I'm not afraid to say this stuff. But this one always feels like there's more to say, or it's got something more up its sleeve. And you're not sitting there thinking, oh yeah, this is 100% padding, like you do with some stories. Now, it could be that you could take a scalpel to this and cut some material away, meaning there really is padding there, but it's done well enough, it's disguised well enough, that you're not ever really thinking about it.
No, absolutely. And this neatly brings me on to the next point I want to make, which is my, as I'm sure you anticipated, Rob, my taking a moment to praise the wonderful Terry Nation.
Yes.
Now, look, I'll get on my soapbox and say there are fans out there that watch this, think it's really good, and say, oh, well, it's so good Terry Nation couldn't have written that. It must have been a Bob Holmes page 1 rewrite. And in the next breath, they'll talk about all the Terry tropes that are included in there. And this is so clearly a Terry Nation script. The themes, the characters, the writing, the tone is very, very Terry Nation. And clearly he was just inspired by the suggestion of Letts and Dix to go and write the Genesis of the Daleks. And once he started writing that and he started to come up with Davros and Nyder and all the rest of it, he clearly just was inspired and wrote some of his best work. But it is very Terry Nation. The plot ideas, the characters are all Terry Nation. And what is also Terry Nation is that understanding of serial television, which is that every episode has to have some action beats and some moments to keep you going and to keep the action going. And you see that in the episodes, and you see that in the cliffhangers. There's cliffhanger after cliffhanger is a moment of action or excitement or tension that's really, really good. You go to part 1 and you get that, perfect. The weaponry is perfect. just really, really subtle, but you see the Daleks. Then you've got the freeze frame of Sarah falling down the gantry. You've got the Doctor being electrocuted. The cliffhanger to part 4 is one that has definitely been down the pub very, very drunk by a few of us over time. What you will tell me. We can act that out pretty well in our little gang of fans. There's just... Terry Nation knows how to keep you interested, and my God, does he do it here.
Yeah, he even throws in a countdown.
There are bombs, there's radiation, it's all of those things, but it's the creation of the characters that is most effective here.
Yeah, and look, similar to what I said with Ark in Space, it's extraordinary when you watch this like we just have within a month or so of Ncuti Gatwa Doctor Who going out, because it's just so grim and bleak, and people get gunned down all the way through. Bodies pile up, literally. There's ambiguity as to why people do what they do. The Khaleds all aren't bad guys per se. There are questions of morality. This is something you can watch as a child because there's no blood and guts, there's no swearing, none of that. And you can just be engrossed by it, and you can be scared by it. But you can also watch this as an adult and take plenty away from it and think about it. This is an example of how Doctor Who works best. And I can sense people rolling their eyes, oh, good work, Rob. It's only one of the best 70s stories, if not one of the best classic stories. Very safe of you to be saying all of that. Yeah, I get that. But just having seen it after the recent season on TV, it's just so clear how different Doctor Who can be over the decades.
Yeah, and that grim nature of it is something that really did come home to me. I think, like a lot of men, as I get older, I get a bit more sentimental because, you've seen more of the world and you create those connections, and you've lost things over your life. And so, as a kid, you see the Khaled's city being destroyed. You're like, okay, that's a cool explosion. As an adult, you do pause and go, that's an entire city of people just destroyed.
Yeah.
And then you get to the Thals and you have that understanding of these people think, wow, we've just won a 1,000-year war. It's time to be victorious. And then Daleks go through and wipe them out. And although we don't see women and children on the screen, presumably there were men, women and children, just civilians sitting at home being wiped out by this rocket or by the Daleks. By the end of it, the good guys get gunned down.
Yeah.
Never mind, we see Ronson, who does a good deed for the Doctor, and he gets killed for his troubles. But then we see Garman and all of his band of goodies just brutally shot down. As you say, bodies literally piling up. Then Nyder gets killed, then Davros gets killed. I want to come back to that later. But you do appreciate just how grim it is and just how much genocide there is, in the real sense of the word.
And speaking of Nyder, I don't know if this is folklore or not, but you've got Nyder with a bloody iron cross on in some of these scenes. And some people say Peter Miles actually brought that along himself and would put it on before takes and eventually got busted, which is why it disappears. It's on and off on his uniform in different takes. I think all he needed was some little Himmler glasses, Dave, and he would have gone full Nazi in this.
So I'm going to question this, Rob, because I've heard these stories as well. Now, I looked at it. Now, I'm not an expert on Nazi memorabilia, but I've seen enough, World War II era movies and television shows. Although it looks like a sort of a Maltese cross, iron cross, I didn't think it looked like an actual iron cross. It looked to me like they've said to the costume department, give us something that looks a bit like an iron cross, but not too close. And they've done something that's very close, but I don't think it quite is. And they've probably gone, actually, on reflection, maybe it's too close, take it off. I don't know. Right. You're very into medals and memorabilia, Rob. Not necessarily Nazi stuff, but you're into that sort of stuff. But did you sort of feel it looked accurate?
Well, the shape is on point.
Yeah, yes, it's definitely a Maltese cross of some sort, yes.
It seems to be sort of blackened out, I think an iron cross might be a bit more metallic looking.
That's my memory, yes.
But, the way it does sort of disappear from the uniform, that's why I've sort of bought into the folklore, because he does have it, and then suddenly he doesn't have it. Was the continuity person asleep, or did they really go, oh no, we can't be having this? Although they are letting them do sort of Hitler salutes at each other, so I don't know.
Yeah, no, it is interesting, and they absolutely have waded into the World War II iconography in no subtle way, and that's appropriate. I think that this is 30 years after the end of World War II, and like when I think about what happened 30 years ago, that's not that long ago. So,
no, well, there'd be people watching this who fought in World War II who are my age now.
Yes.
And I think I don't feel that old. You know, but there would have been people my age watching this who had fought in World War II. That's how close it was.
Yes, and then people, a little bit younger who had grown up in World War II. So, yeah, like it was just, I think, at that point when you really could start doing allusions to World War II in this way. I think it was really just the first sort of era of that. So that works really, really well.
And just on Nazis, we've got to mention, of course, that Guy Siner goes on to play Lieutenant Gruber in 'Allo 'Allo. So it's just very funny to see him in this.
Yes, look, I don't have a lot of time for 'Allo 'Allo, but you are absolutely correct. And I was going to mention the cast, including Guy Siner, Peter Miles, Michael Wisher, Stephen Yardley. Like, this is a very well-cast piece of television. David Maloney absolutely knew what he was doing. Now, I praised Terry Nation before, but as much as it's got the good Terry Nation tropes, it does have some of the weaker ones as well. And that is that sometimes his conception of a world doesn't always work with reality, and many people have commented on the two domes within spitting distance having a long war. I like to imagine that they're just the closer cities of two larger countries, and maybe there's a whole bunch of Karls and Thals several hundred kilometres back. Where are the farms? Where's the industry? And obviously we know enough Thals survive that they're able to perpetuate and populate the species, and given we only see one female Thal survive, we assume there are others out there somewhere if they repopulated the species. Otherwise Bataan was doing a lot of heavy lifting in that repopulation. And also Nation does have this thing of doing very large scope, 4 universes and all the rest of it, and I think the 1,000 Years of War doesn't quite work. It just is a bit too much to really sort of either be comprehended or to really work. If he'd said 90 years of war, you go, okay, that's 3 or 4 generations. Yeah, I get that. I can see that devolution in technology and culture, all the rest of it. And I think that maybe if he just fixed a few of those things, this would be even better.
Yeah, that was hard for me as a kid, because there's even the scene where they hold up like a laser rifle in one hand and like a single shot rifle in the other. And for mine, if your culture has got to laser rifles, how long ago did you leave the single shot, like Lee Enfield sort of rifles? I just don't know why they would have something. Did they get them out of a museum? Where did they get all the ammunition from? I get the vibe they're going for, but it didn't. I couldn't see that as making sense, that you would suddenly get 1,000-year-old rifles from somewhere en masse and equip an army with them.
Yeah, look, it sort of worked conceptually for me, particularly as a kid, and particularly the scene where they say, oh, well, we won't shoot these people, we'll hang them. And you go, oh, they're devolving again. We're seeing a step go down from gunshots to hanging, So it works, but yeah, conceptually it doesn't quite necessarily hold together.
Because even now, I mean, Baker rifles and Brown Bess muskets from the Napoleonic Wars, that's only a couple hundred years ago. There's not many of those around.
Yeah, well, is it that they found them all, or was it that these are cheaper and easier to manufacture?
Oh, maybe. Yeah, maybe if they're manufacturing them.
Yeah, that's how I took it. We probably don't need to assess it any further than that. Rob, we've spoken several minutes now about Genesis of the Daleks and haven't properly mentioned Davros.
I'll start with the negative, which is when I was a kid, I didn't really understand why he looked so alien to everyone else. Even if he'd had an accident, why is his skin so stylized? The mask is slightly too stylized for me. I think I like the more melty skin sort of mid-80s Davros look better.
Okay.
As being a bit more realistic. Whereas here, parts of him look very realistic, but other parts just look too squared off. He doesn't look like a real person.
Okay, I can understand that. I've never had a problem with it, but I get where you're coming from.
Yeah, that's just me starting on a negative, because otherwise I think Davros is a fantastic Doctor Who villain, and this is a wonderful debut story for him.
Yeah, it's a really good performance. We're not breaking particularly new ground here, saying that Davros, as played by Michael Wisher, is a fantastic performance. The thing that really struck me, though, was how much this character works as a one-off, and how effective that arc is to see him go from desperate to perpetuate his race to perpetuating himself to betraying the Khalid so the Daleks can be created, and then the moment of realization that no, they are uncontrollable and utterly evil, and the decision he makes to destroy them because he reaches for the destruct button.
Yeah.
And then he's killed with that blood-curdling scream. And I just thought, that's it. Yeah. That's the perfect character arc. And whilst there are many Davros stories that I've loved, and there's some great Davros performances that I'm very glad we have, part of me does watch that and thinks, if only they'd kept him to one story, wouldn't that just be an amazing arc and an amazing finish?
Yeah. Yeah, and you could potentially tell some prequel stories, maybe even pre-accident prequel stories where he's not in the chair.
Let's not go down that rabbit hole.
Dave, I would give this a 9 out of 10.
I would give this an A.
Yeah.
So I think we are on par for that one. Look, it is... I think the arc in space is just a little bit better for me. You've said this is the best, I think, unless Revenge is about to surprise us. But depending on my mood, I could like both of them equally. It's hard to split them. This is just such a good season. When you've got the arc in space versus Genesis of the Daleks for best in the season, I mean, how spoiled are we?
Yeah, this is the bigger achievement for me by being a really good six-parter.
Yeah, I get that. I get that. I think that if you were trying to grade them objectively, you would probably say that Genesis is the better piece of work. I just get sucked into the arc in space that tiny little bit more. But look, I mean, whether this is an A or an A+, like, who cares? It's a classic.
Exactly.
Revenge of the Cybermen, Rob.
Yes, by Gerry Davis, with a lot of input, shall we say, from Robert Holmes.
Yes.
Dave, this is one of those stories that's always had a bit of an odour about it in fandom to me. Never quite panned like a Time and the Rani by any means, but never spoken of in glowing terms by everyone either. I've never had an issue with it myself. Maybe it's because I watched it when I was still young in the mid-80s on that VHS that my brother bought. So it was always just a thrilling space adventure with Cybermen and Tom Baker being awesome. So it's always been that in my mind. I don't know. I've always been fine with this. I like the way it reuses the Ark in Space set, and the idea of repurposing the beacon, I think, in the future is really cool. Although the idea that the station would last thousands of years in order to do that seems quite far-fetched when you stop and think about it. I mean, I did some research here, Dave. The ISS went up 25 years ago, and it's already stuffed. So, although future technology might be a bit better, I still don't think a structure in space would really last thousands of years. But that's my only complaint there.
No, like you, I love the idea of revisiting the set and reusing the set. And as a kid particularly, it just made so much sense. It was such a wonderful idea, particularly because the set is so good and you've got those long corridors with space behind them. It just looks fantastic. Rob, I went into this story with a lot of people having said on Twitter, and we raised it, this is the weakest of the story. And I watched this story, and whatever else you say about it, its faults, it's got some faults. I was never for a single moment bored watching this.
No.
It's a good plot with cool aliens, good monsters, a space setting, a number of ideas, cybermats, plagues, transmats, rockets, spaceships. It's everything that a young Doctor Who fan would want, and a, young at heart, older Doctor Who fan could want. It's just a great space adventure. Is it particularly sophisticated? Look, no, it's not. It's a pretty simple sort of story. But even then, Kelman himself is pretty interesting because the guy's an arsehole.
Yeah.
Like, the guy's a wicked, wicked character, but at first when you think he's a cyber agent, you're going, oh, well, he's the baddie. Then you go, well, he's not the cyber agent. He wants to wipe the Cybermen out. He's merciless about how he does it, and he does it for very, very avaricious reasons. So he's not, the most complicated and morally dubious character. Like, he's still an arsehole.
Yes.
But there's a bit more going on there than perhaps we give them credit for.
Yeah, I mean, he's prepared to gun down the Doctor and the remaining crew members to get his way early on in the piece, rather than bringing them in on the scheme,
Yeah, and he kills 47 crewmen before the story starts.
Well, that too. Yeah, so I agree on that. Tom, I think, is quite tough in this story, Dave. You know, the way he gets stuck into the Cybermen verbally is really quite something. It makes me wonder how Pertwee would have done it. I don't think he would have been so up in their face. Maybe sarcastic to them, but not so loudly mocking. And I don't think Pat would have been like this before him. Maybe Bill, if he'd had, you know, some more Cyberman stories up his sleeve, might have been calling them tin soldiers and having a bit of a rant at them. It's interesting to think about, but I really like Tom in this story.
Yeah, Tommy's fantastic. Liz is fantastic. Ian is fantastic. It's a good story. Again, there's a really strong cast. Lots of people who are in other Doctor Who episodes or Blake 7 episodes, which is really, really good. But I think the thing that really makes it work is the location footage. I think if we'd gone from that wonderful space station set to a quarry, that would have been significantly detrimental. But going from a cool space station set to a proper cave, I think just means there is a consistency of visual standard through this that helps to hold the whole thing together. And when it looks good both on location and on the space station, and there's always something happening in the story, that it holds together really well.
Yeah, those Wookiee Hole scenes are really good, quite atmospheric, and I think they do a good job trying to match the location stuff with the studio. Of course, you know when it's a studio, but compared to some efforts in classic Doctor Who over the years, I think the cave sets look really good. They don't really crap the bed. They look passable, which for the 70s, with some of the stuff that wasn't passable, is actually a really, really big effort. And heck, that Vogan logo is so good, the Time Lords nick it later on, Dave.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, there are a couple of moments when the two Vogon factions are forced to have a gunfight at about, 30 centimetres apart, which is, it's right, it's 1970s Doctor Who, like, okay, that's fine. But given that the rest of the story feels so big, and the beacon, whether it's there as the Ark or Nova Beacon, it never feels small. It always feels like they've got to go somewhere to go to other, like they've got to go down corridors and they've got to go. It takes them time to get around this station. It's really well filmed. Once again, Rob, we've gone a long chat about this story without mentioning the titular monster. Comments on the Cybermen from you?
It's great to see Cybermen back because I love Cybermen. Whenever I watch this, I always end up thinking, not about the Cybermen in this story, but I always end up thinking about what it would have been like if we'd had them in the Pertwee era. I assume they would have looked pretty much like this, maybe acted like this, I don't know. But talking about them in this story, I love seeing them back. I just have that soft spot for them that I find them hard to criticise. I know people get stuck in over this. I know, like you were saying earlier, people saying, oh, this is the worst of the season. I mean, surely Sontaran Experiment is the most basic of the season, with its 15 minutes of story in 50 minutes. I like the Cybermen. I like this story. I don't have much more to say than that.
I like the Cybermen. I like the adventure that we get from the Cybermen. Watching it this time, look, I'm not going to completely pan the way the Cybermen are written, but I do see the criticism that they're just a little bit too emotional and sort of have witty and ironic lines and stuff. I did sort of watch it this time and go, oh, that's probably a little bit too out there even for me to defend. So that is a fault. I see that, but do I care that much because I'm enjoying the story? Well, no. That's a fan being picky.
The bit I really like? This idea that they've been smashed in this war and they are these sad little tin soldiers on their little spaceship tootling around the universe still wanting to take over. I like that vibe. There's something sad about it.
Yeah, and I've often thought, even if some of the shots of them striding around the beacon with their hands on their hips don't quite work, we still get two Cybermen going down to Voga and just taking on the entire Vogan Defence Force and winning.
Yes.
They're not written or shown deliberately to be poor or pathetic. Is the costume the best cyber costume we've had? No. Are the performances the best cyber performances? No. But even at that weaker sort of depiction, they still are an implacable, ruthless, unstoppable force. And in the end, one of the good guys has to sacrifice his life to stop those two Cybermen. So they're still very effective as a force.
Oh, yeah. I love when the Vogons are like... the Cybermen have landed and they're not stopping for anything. They're just smashing through us. And it's like, oh, yeah. Because you see that on screen, but when you hear it said verbally, you can just hear the fear and the worry they've got over just two Cybermen being on the planet. Yeah. Yeah,
absolutely. Absolutely. No, it's a really good story. I'm giving it a B, which is the same as I gave Robot. I'm struggling to split the weakest of the season, and they're both getting Bs, and I'm struggling to split the best of the season. They're both getting AA pluses. Like, Jesus, it's good. What about you for Revenge, Rob?
Yeah, I'm giving it 8 out of 10, which is the same as Ark in Space.
Very nice. So very high scores across the board from both of us.
Yeah, it's up there for me.
So, look, I don't have anything more really to say that I haven't already said, other than I enjoy all 5 of these stories. They were very easy to watch. The Hinchcliffe era, the Tom Baker era, is forming as we watch it, and it's just enjoyable. More than anything else, forget the analysis, forget the picking apart, forget whatever. I just sat down and I was never bored by these 5 stories. I just enjoyed them.
Yeah, hear. And when you think about how beloved this season is versus how the new season of Doctor Who was panned, and I know this is the 3rd time I've brought up the new season of Doctor Who, but we have just watched it in the last month, so it's top of mind. You start to wonder if this modern idea of what the audience wants from Doctor Who today is really what the audience wants. I think if the new season was more like this, if it was a modern version of this, it would be adored by a much wider group of fans, because people like drama, they like tension, they like bad guys who are genuinely evil and do evil things, they like horrible mutations, they like stuff that makes them think. And that's where TV is at today. This is why people watch things like House of the Dragon or The Walking Dead or Sons of Anarchy or whatever. And I know some listeners might be spitting out their tea and say, you can't turn Doctor Who into those shows, but that's not what I'm saying. It's a tone thing. It's this gothic vibe of the Hinchcliffe era that everyone talks about and loves, and which is really well suited to the show. It appeals to adults, appeals to kids who want to be scared and have a reaction to what's on screen. If you're 10 years old today, are you more affected by watching a CGI Sutekh dragged through the universe on his dog leash, or by the Doctor being attacked by Khaled mutants in a darkened laboratory? To me, it's just obvious which is the more scary and the more interesting and the more engrossing.
Yeah, look, I know exactly what you're saying, and as we've said before, times change. I mean, we grew up as kids on stuff like Battle of the Planets and Astro Boy going around wiping people out and, people getting killed and shooting machine guns out of his ass. So, we grew up in a different time, and I think that we were lucky to have that as kids' TV. I think we were lucky to grow up with repeats of the Hinchcliffe era, but, Bluey's popular too, I guess.
Yeah, I'll just finish by saying it's a great season of 70s Doctor Who. There are Tom seasons I like more when you weigh up all the stories involved, but this one's very watchable. Great stories, and it gets the 4th Doctor off to a flyer.
Yeah, this is an era that in some ways is only going to get better with several better seasons. Yeah, it just shows how good the show... I mean, the show wasn't just its golden era in that mid-70s time, wasn't it?
That's it, yeah.